Hello, Drew. Nice to see you. As I say, it might be a little bit of um, short, sharper one today. With obviously, unfortunately, Dan is absent, but we have a new year and yet again another Australian Open. How's the new year started for you, and how have you seen things from a tennis perspective?
Oh, this time of year is always interesting because my fall is so dominated by American football, and that's winding down now. We only have 13 games
Mm.
left. Betting a lot of NBA, and now like
Yeah, I saw
sincerely
you on one of
switching.
the streams with Rob.
Yeah, we were chatting. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
Rob is the Pinnacle under the Pinnacle banner now too, which is quite cool. But the
he is
regular
indeed.
season
Yeah.
winding down. We're in the playoffs, and now it's time to really switch gears. And I love the Australian Open. I love the start of the season. There are a couple fun, interesting wrinkles and handicapping angles that I think you can actually count on year over year for this event. The Australian Open, if you did not know, this kicks off the kind of the tennis calendar in terms of slams, and really it falls extremely early in the overall calendar. Players tend to play hard into the tour
Mm.
finals if they are, if anyone that has realistic expectations of winning a slam is playing into the tour finals, and that ends in November. And you really only have about a month to kind of regroup and recharge your batteries. Some of the players elect to do exhibition events all throughout the month of December instead of just regrouping, which I've never really understood. And I felt like that has kind of steered some players away from success at the Australian Open and in the Australian swing in general. But we here, kind of have a couple of very brief warm up events. You had the United Cup last week, which was interesting. Djokovic, we saw him in some questionable form, I would say. And then, right into, a
Yep.
week of prep
Yeah.
for the Aussie Open. We're going to get a draw here this week. And honestly, looks like a really, really fun tournament. Both the men's and women's, I think, are going to be really, really competitive. You have some big names at the top who are in form, who are going to have very good seeding. So in a lot of years, we kind of look at, how broad is the field of realistic winners, right? Are we talking about like 20? Are we talking about 30? Like there's been some WA slams where that's been the case. That is no longer the case as we've really seen the cream rise to the top on the women's tour. And then I think maybe we made some jokes about Wimbledon and the French Open, like, hey, wake me up when we get to Alcaraz Djokovic and the tournament effectively starts. Well, I think you absolutely have to kind of open your mind to the
Yeah.
idea of Sinner breaking through this year. You got to open up your mind to the idea that Medvedev, particularly with these conditions, is going to be somewhat of a contender. And so I think rather than just having sort of a two-man race in the on the men's side, it does become a question of, am I going against Djokovic, and who else has a realistic chance? But it's set up well for a pretty entertaining tournament, and it's just a funny kind of clash where you have guys who really just players who are haven't played a lot of tennis, and then conditions that are extremely fast, which makes it kind of a funky
Yeah.
meshing of kind of figuring out how to get your game up to speed as quickly as possible to be competitive.
Well, that's one of the things I was looking at. You see, I believe Yannick Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz, and Medvedev haven't really played in many sort of these tune-up events before before the Aussie Open. So, like you say, it's like some of these players might be coming in warm, but are they going to be realistic sort of title contenders? And as you say, is this cream going to rise to the top? Just before we sort of delve into it, because I wanted to talk about, obviously say as some of the form and some of the trends that you may have seen, which might be significant. But I thought I'd round up a few players that are sort of going to be absent from this tournament, some of the players that are going to be returning from injury and things like that. So the big one is Rafa Nadal, who I think announced that he was not going to compete yesterday. Um, I think it was that injury that is just won't heal enough, the hip, which is very obviously. I think there's a lot of outpouring of sort of from all the players consoling him, but he won't be there, and neither will Nick Kyrgios, who obviously one of the home, I wouldn't say favourites, but well, in terms of for the tournament, but he's a home favourite in terms of when he's in Melbourne, and especially that doubles with Kokkinakis a year or so ago was great to see. And then over in the WTA events, there'll be no Madison Keys, Petra Kvitova, Bianca Andreescu, but we will be seeing a return of the likes of Caroline Wozniacki, the big one being Naomi Osaka back in the fold, and as well as Angelique Kerber and Emma Raducanu got a last sort of minute entry in the last week or so to into the main draw. So that's sort of where we're at in terms of who's in and who's out. But so as I say, it does feel like that United Cup, especially sort of. I was surprised how quickly that sort of started, and it did creep up on me. But from these last few events, we've had Brisbane, Adelaide, Auckland, to name a few. What have you seen in terms of sort of players' stocks that have risen, or any sort of prominent indicators of form, or players who might cause who might be going in with in a rich vein of form?
Sure. So a lot to unpack there. To start with Nadal, didn't really move the needle a ton for me in terms of the outright market to see him go. I mean, as a fan, I want to see him play. I assumed he was treating this as an opportunity to build up ranking points because, like, my expectation of him at this point in his career is that he's going to make one more go of it at the French Open, and then that's probably it. And you want to see him in peak form for that. And so if playing the Australian Open meant that he would either carry an injury into the spring and then not be in peak form for the French Open, then by all means, like, take the time off, get right. Like, we want you good for clay. And I think him, stepping out, actually probably, this is going to sound weird and maybe even insane, I think it hurts Djokovic because Nadal was the kind of player that was going to probably knock out some of the higher variance young players in the middle portion of the tournament, right? Third, fourth round, like he's a guy you could count on to beat a youngster who might be a little starstruck. Oh, I'm playing Rafa Nadal, right? Like he definitely has like the wily and nature and the experience to pop some of those guys. And now if those guys end up in this, deeper in this tournament, now they're a little bit more of a threat to Djokovic potentially. And, I'm circling guys like Ben Shelton, guys who, have like a ceiling that we don't really know where it is. Holger Rune maybe qualifies to a degree in that regard. It's kind of an interesting one for me as we look at this field. But, it's going to be... it's still going to be contested by the guys at the top. And you're right. We haven't seen Alcaraz. We haven't seen Sinner. Last time we saw those guys play, meaningful tennis was November. They played well, but not well enough to beat Djokovic at the Tour Finals. They did do some damage, though. Djokovic, for what it's worth, I don't entirely know why he switched gears in terms of his approach. It felt like for 80% of the 2023 calendar, Djokovic was singularly focused on slams, like nothing else mattered, right? He wasn't even really entering some of the other kind of meaningful tournaments. And then all of a sudden, like he decided, hey, end of the season, I'm just going to go absolute foot to the pedal, concede nothing. He wins Paris and then turns around and wins the Tour Finals. And honestly, that is problematic, I think, because he's an older player, and he was he was playing 3-set matches in Paris. He was playing 3-set matches in the Tour Finals, and he picked up what looks like a non-trivial wrist injury to me. His form in the United Cup I thought was very questionable. He had a dominant win in round one, but it was against much lesser competition, and then came through and had to kind of. He made a little bit of a meal of his match with Jiri Lecheka before ultimately coming through 6-1, 7-6-7, 6-1. And then, third match against an in-form Alex de Minaur, a player who's on the come up, who's kind of, definitely has the potential for home crowd support in Australia. De Minaur destroyed him. Like, it was not a very competitive match, and there were specific signs in that match that you can kind of question. Like, is his wrist okay? Like, is he going to be able to handle 7 best-of-5 matches in 2 weeks, which is a very physically demanding toll? And I honestly am willing to kind of swing here. You guys have the yes no market up, and Djokovic is a healthy favorite here. His yes price is 197. I'm into this no 180 1847. I think that is a realistic shot on the field. I don't have a strong sense of who exactly does win this title if Djokovic goes out early, but the chances of Djokovic pulling out because of the injury, I think, are non-zero. And just in general, the injury affecting him to the tune of not being able to come up with kind of a key performance, because a lot of the times, like earlier in tournaments, he's not really playing. He's not at like 100% level. He wants to try to build into a tournament typically. And there are definitely moments you can point to in some of his title runs in round 3, round 4, where, he's up against a challenger who's having a nice run of form. They're playing well. And, he's down 0-2 all of a sudden, and he has to fight through and win 3 straight sets. Well, if he's dealing with some injury concerns, and if he's a little bit out of gas because he played so hard so late into the season last year, then I think that really opens up the door for potential upset. So Djokovic being kind of on the outside of what is typically a tournament that he literally just he own, like, we shouldn't mince words, like he owns the Australian Open. Like, this is his tournament. These are his conditions. Yeah. He is the most phenomenal returner in the game that game has ever seen, and so in these very fast hard court conditions, he is uniquely positioned to be the toughest out. So I'm not trying to say that he doesn't he's going to lose, but I think that the price being around evens right now, that he is the ultimate winner of this tournament considering his form, I take exception to. Alcaraz certainly can beat him. We know this. Alcaraz can beat him in fast conditions at slam level. We know this. We saw it last year at Wimbledon. And if Alcaraz takes him down in this one, I will not be shocked. Yep. Jannik Sinner is kind of the most interesting player to talk about, because Sinner is, like, if you just kind of hold and break percentages, if you take service points 1, return point 1 percentages, and you synthesize, like, well, how is this player playing on hard courts over the last 6 months, Sinner is almost the same as Djokovic, if not a little bit better, which is kind of fascinating because, we know he has the skills. He's never broken through. These are the conditions that should, give him the opportunity to have a breakthrough. And I think 2024, one of the big things that tennis would like to see is someone else step up and win a slam besides Alcaraz. And Sinner is the kind of the obvious heir apparent to being that guy. And so this is a huge opportunity for him. We haven't seen him play since since things got started back up. And I understand that, and I agree with that, because he is locked into the 4 seed. So he's going to have a premier seed. He's going to have his own quarter here. He's not going to have to face either Alcaraz or Djokovic until a semifinal at the earliest. And I think that affords him a pretty clean opportunity to tune up at the early stages of this tournament. So if I had to take one price right now in the men's market, Sinner at 6.6 is kind of the one that stands out the most obviously to me. And I know it's a gamble because he has never done it before, and it's always a little. I'm usually the last person who's like, I'm going to bet on a guy to win his first slam. This is happening this time. Like it's a fool's errand very often. But I hold Sinner right now at a little bit higher rating than I have even Alcaraz. The only reason then you would tip Alcaraz over Sinner would be because of Alcaraz's slam pedigree. But the conditions and really what we've seen from Alcaraz over the last 6 months what we've seen from Sinner over the last 6 months is enough for me to believe he can either knock out Djokovic in the semifinals or take down Alcaraz in the finals. So I think ultimately Sinner is your bet at price. And if you don't want to kind of single a specific guy, I think taking no against Djokovic in the yes/no market is a fair play as well.
Perfect. Yeah. So some already some big calls there. That's the thing when you picked up on Djokovic. I think he's won, is it 10 Australian Opens? Had a little look yesterday, and I realised how dominant. As you say,
might as well be 100.
Is,
yeah, might as well be 100
in Melbourne. It's ridiculous. Yeah, and then I think Sinner won the most improved player of 2023. So he was the one that everyone was speaking about at the back end of last year, and does feel like he beat Djokovic, didn't he, in the round robin of the ATP finals. But then I guess you see Djokovic, his just pedigree and his real resilience and what he's all about, to just come back through and beat him when it really matters. But one thing just quickly before we really properly delve into that ATP market, the men's market, is I wondered what you thought. The last Grand Slam was US Open hard court. This is Australian Open hard court. It's obviously very different sort of climates and areas. What do you think are going to be the different conditions go here in Melbourne?
Well, the US Open court speed is noticeably slower than the Australian, for sure. And it's a little bit more of a leveling speed. It kind of opens the door for players who are more comfortable on clay. The U.S. Open is also typically just as hot. It's typically humid. It's a very tough environment. In late summer in New York, and they were given a little bit of a reprieve last year because there was enough rain that they had the roof closed a lot, and so that made it kind of a little bit of a controlled environment. It wasn't as taxing on the players as it normally is. The Australian Open, kind of beyond just being a very, very fast court, which tends to lend itself to the players who have stronger service. Tends to kind of you would see a player who has, say, something like 70% service points won, 30-40% return points won. That those numbers will tip to like 80-20, right? Just because the court speed is that much faster, and it makes the matches a little bit more dependent on tiebreak. It makes your particular kind of rhythm on serve more important. Like if you're not able to vary your style of service, where you're placing the ball and getting it in on first serve, relatively high first serve percentage, you're vulnerable on a given day. There are certain players who tend to play here very well. Of the men, the one that really stands out as you just kind of look at results on tour compared to results at the Australian Open is Stefanos Tsitsipas. Tsitsipas is typically a guy that is just he's a tough guy to pin down in terms of where he's going to perform well and on what surface and what conditions. But for whatever reason, and it may be just the fact that there is a huge Greek support, fan-wise, a little bit of a mess, I guess, is kind of a polite way to put it. In the last, I guess, really like 11 months, since his run to the finals at the Australian Open last year. I just haven't really seen anything from him that has suggested he's got another gear and an opportunity to make some noise here. He made a couple of decent runs on clay. Barcelona, he made it to the finals before losing, and he made it to the quarterfinals in Madrid, semifinals in Rome, quarterfinals at Roland Garros. But since then, it's been very, very quiet from him. I don't know if he's quietly dealing with an injury or what the story is, but I've kind of written him off for this tournament.
Sorry, I was going to say, didn't he have to pull out quite late of the tour finals? And there was a little bit of discussion over why he pulled out so late, and he should have let that, because Hurkacz only had that one game and he could have played and things like that.
Yeah, that's a good memory. That was a little bit of it wasn't a scandal, but it was kind of just poor sportsmanship, I guess, because he realistically was not going to be able to compete. So he's kind of a little bit of a wild card here, right? Like, does he show up and like he's all of a sudden he's the form we saw from him last year, and he's kind of popping some of these players who have grander hopes. Maybe his seed is going to be 7, so he's going to be relatively highly seeded. He'll but that said, like, with a top 8 seed, Tsitsipas at some point runs into Sinner, Medvedev, Alcaraz, or Djokovic at the quarterfinal stage, and then that's probably the end of the road. So Tsitsipas probably could clear out the quarter for somebody else before eventually bowing out, but I still don't hold him in especially high likelihood. Of the guys who are like truly in form that have shown it, there are 2 names who have especially impressed in the year 2024 so far. The first we already mentioned is Alex de Minaur. He's Australian. He's going to be your 12th seed, I believe. 10. He's up to 10. He's going to be your 10th seed, so he's going to be relatively highly seeded.
He's gone up to 10,
and he is. Yeah, he's going to be interesting. He's not a player that I think realistically has chance to win here, but he could definitely make some noise and potentially spoil somebody's party depending on where he lands in the draw. Similarly, Grigor Dimitrov. Grigor Dimitrov has played quite well so far in the year 2024. I don't know that he ultimately can put together a nice run of form here, but you remember way back in the day when we had in the market and shown you much in a while. It's just been a while since he's done anything noteworthy. Dimitrov, by the way,
what's happened to him?
Sure.
What has happened to Casper Ruud?
So 2 years ago, he made the finals at the Roland Garros, and he made the finals at the U.S. Open. And he had so many ranking points that he was all of a sudden like getting like outstanding seeds, and just like, he was well positioned in every tournament. He played more than he ought to have. He played a bunch of exhibitions into last year's Australian Open instead of taking the time because like I have a beef with players who do this, like where they aren't like respectful of what like an appropriate schedule is, right? Like you need to give yourself an opportunity to rest and regroup at some point. You can't just play through the winter months and expect to be able to not have impacts of fatigue in January. And so Ruud played through last year at an aggressive pace. I don't know why. He came into the Australian Open and he was a joke. Like it was like his form was so far off. It just like eye opening. Like, wow, what happened to this guy? And honestly, like that kind of chased him all throughout the calendar. Like he never really got a chance to kind of fully regroup and find anywhere close to what we saw from him in 2022. I think the fact that he now has had a true reset makes him a bit more of an interesting case for this particular Australian Open. I'm very, very interested to see where he lands. Right now, his ELO rating is way down relative to his peak. Right now, his ranking all of a sudden has slipped to where he's going to have to play some good players in order to make a run. But it is worth noting he played 3 warm-up matches at the United Cup. He was dominant. He dispatched Griekspoor of the Netherlands in the first match. He absolutely embarrassed Borna Coric in his second match, and then he backed that up with a clean defeat of Adrian Manarino in the third match. So he has shown enough for me to be interested in him. His price in the 52 range, draw depending, I think is worth a gamble. He's good enough to beat the likes of an Alcaraz or a Sinner or a Medvedev for sure. And he's definitely, with Djokovic potentially ailing from a wrist injury, if Ruud ends up in Djokovic's quarter, that's going to be a fun match potentially in the later stages of the tournament. So the guys that I would circle beyond the top 4 in no particular order are de Minaur, Dimitrov, and Ruud. Everybody else kind of that is sort of in that mix. We mentioned Tsitsipas. He may be interesting from a match by match standpoint, but I'm not taking any kind of future price on him. I think Rublev is an easy scratch. I think Zverev is an easy scratch. I think Rune is an easy scratch. Hurkacz scratch. Okay. And maybe the most easy of all, our current 12 seed, Mr. Taylor Fritz. He is guilty of the Casper Ruud bad decision making from last year, where he played through at an aggressive clip and is going to be absolutely gassed heading into this tournament. And if he gets popped in round 1 or round 2, will not be surprised.
Okay, and then also someone I wanted to mention, or like who do these sort of top four guys want to sort of avoid in round one or two? I was looking down at some of the odds down here, and you've got even someone like Sebastian Korda, who beat Medvedev last year. He made the quarterfinals last year. And even someone like Felix Auger-Aliassime, who I think in years gone by when I've been doing this podcast, he's been someone that is mentioned quite a lot, but over the sort of the course of the last year to 6 months, his ranking has moved down quite a lot. But I always think some of these guys you just don't want to get in that first or second round, because you never know what sort of form they're going to come in with.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Felix, I mean, there was no player who had a greater drop off in form in 2023 relative to 2022 than Felix. But that's it, and I don't know if his priorities, life priorities shifted or something, where he's not like putting in the time to prepare, or like just doesn't really care anymore. But that's kind of how bad it was that you're asking yourself that. And then similarly, Korda is a huge injury risk for, like, you're right. Like, Korda is a guy that, is he going to be able to sustain peak form for 7 matches, best of 5? No. Is he going to be a guy who could potentially stir the pot in round 2 against a ranked opponent? Absolutely. Like, there's definitely landmines like that. I would put both of those guys in that discussion. There's really no one else kind of way down the board that I think spooks you. There are the players who kind of fit the upset
to see
mold.
How Jack Draper does.
Yeah. See, now, that's a great shout, because Draper, like, if you were to kind of construct a skill set that should succeed here, he's got it, right? Like, he's definitely kind of fits the mold of a player who should perform well at the Australian Open. He's had some big moments here throughout his young career. So he suffered from he was a huge letdown last year due to injury only, almost. But he finished the season strong.
Yeah.
He made a run to the finals at Sofia. He didn't ultimately take home a title. He lost to Adrian Manarino, which was a bit of a disappointment in the final there. And he's playing at Adelaide right now, having beaten Sebastian Baez like very convincingly recently. And he could come into this one in a healthy bit of form, because Adelaide is there for him to. Basically, he can win Adelaide. He's definitely the best player in terms of not the best, but he has a very realistic chance of winning that tournament. So Draper's a great one to keep an eye on.
Just before we sort of round up, maybe I know you've mentioned a few of your favoured bets, but we can just round up on that in terms of the men's side. You mentioned about how the sort of the hard courts here, they could play where you might have a lot longer games and things like that. Do you foresee that some of these maybe top seeds might have to end up playing 5 sets a lot quicker than they actually thought they would?
Man, the chaotic nature of super fast hard court means more tie breaks, and tie breaks are a little bit more inherently random, right? There are players like Djokovic who have shown a propensity for being able to win tie breaks consistently, and for those, for that reason, he is able to avoid especially long matches. Although I would say that in the back of my head, yes, I think there's potentially a potential for for more 5-set matches early on for the good players in this tour, just because of the conditions that we're seeing right now. Yeah.
Perfect. And then, I know you mentioned at the top of the show, but what would you sort of say in terms of your sort of best bets, of the things that you sort of eyed up here on the Pinnacle markets that could have a little bit of value in?
Yeah, 2 heaviest stakes for me, and really the only 2 full stakes that I've taken are no on Djokovic outright, and yes on, or just outright on Sinner. I think this is Sinner's breakthrough opportunity. What we saw from him to finish last year was the it was kind of the perfect way to end the season, I thought, for kind of priming for a breakout here. He looks fit. He's not carrying any injury right now, and I think ultimately has a high enough ceiling that he could beat Alcaraz or Djokovic, and that's really what you have to have some conviction that the player you're backing is capable of beating those two players in order to win this title, and Sinner can. So he needs to have a little bit of intestinal fortitude. There's definitely some slam matches he should have won, and he capitulated. I think he's got enough of a ceiling to get it done here. So let's go, Sinner.
Perfect. And I thought I'd just mention the other yes/no we've got on site at the moment is for Carlos Alcaraz. His yes to win the Australian Open is currently at plus 318, and at no is at minus 405. But it sounds like on this podcast we're fading Alcaraz. It's not a sure thing that he's going to come through here.
Yeah, my fair price for him is 7, and he is currently in market at 4. So not going to have any Alcaraz in this tournament. So honestly, like, could I
not a slide of Alcaraz?
No, and I could get caught by surprise. Like, he showed up at Wimbledon with no pedigree on grass, and he was the best player at that tournament. Like, it was not a doubt, right? And so he has enough of kind of a unicorn ceiling where he could show up and be the best player. Like, that should not surprise any of us. And honestly, like, if we see a couple of matches and he is adapting to the conditions well, would I add some? I would consider it, but like, I'd like to see what his draw looks like. He's going to be the at the bottom. So if he plays Djokovic, it's not going to be till the final. I'd like to see what the fourth quarter looks like in terms of some of the other kind of big names. If he can avoid De Minaur, if he can avoid Dimitrov, if he can avoid who's the other two that I would have a little bit of a concern. Really, I guess that's it. If De Minaur and Dimitrov are not in the fourth quarter, I think he's pretty likely your fourth quarter winner. But I need to see the draw first. I guess Ben Shelton is also worth mentioning in sort of the outsiders who have a chance. Like, again, just like Jack Draper. Draper and Ben Shelton are the U.S. and U.K. equivalent of guys who should be competitors at this tournament. And so I'd like to see Draper, Shelton, Dimitrov, and De Minaur. If all of those guys land outside of Q4, then Alcaraz is probably your likely Q4 winner.
Yeah. There we go. Should we move things on to the WTA side of things? Well, first of all, we've got the top 4, which has been pretty set for a little while now, especially that top 3 of Iga Swiatek, the current champion, reigning champion, Aryna Sabalenka, and Elena Rybakina. And over the back end of 2023, in a large part down to her US Open win, Coco Gauff is our 4th choice favourite at Pinnacle at plus 762. We will speak about them shortly, but I just thought, who do you think could have a big say in either winning the tournament outside of them or just stopping one of those top 4 from claiming the title?
Oof, man. Well, I have handicapped enough women's slams in my life to know that it's never really as simple as the top of the board. There's always a little bit of weirdness and chaos and surprise when it comes to women's tennis, because you do have players that tend to come out of nowhere, like an Emma Raducanu, right? Like, players who just catch fire and they don't know any better. They don't know they're not supposed to win a slam in a given year. And part of the reason that is the case is the best of 3 form. It's the best of 3. Like, if you're having an off day, if Djokovic in the Australian Open or Nadal at the French, if you're having a little bit of a slump to start, you lose 2, yeah, you can still fight back. You can still win in 5. If you're having an off day and you lose 2 in the women's tour, your tournament is over. So that adds a little bit of kind of less certainty to the women's side. But I will tell you this. This is the most top-heavy women's tournament that we have had in the last 10 years. I think actually, I would say going back to like when Serena Williams made up half of the pool, right? Like that was probably not 10 years ago, but we'll say like 5 or 6 years ago, where Serena like had like 50% equity at like Wimbledon or whatever. But now, like the amount of
ridiculous.
equity that's eaten up by Iga, Sabalenka and Rybakina for this tournament is bigger than I've had for any 3 players in a really long time. And I put Coco as a clear 4th outsider, actually. Her U.S. Open was magical. It was fun. It was very cool to be a part of. It was emotional to watch.
Yeah.
And her entire U.S. swing was just... she was a different player. Like her first half of 2023, it was miserable. There were times where you really were like, man, she has lost the plot. She's taken a step back. This is not good. We want her to, I need to see something, do something. And the pressure, I think, got to her in a good way, to where her, her fall was just superb. But I think that was the exception, not the rule. And I think now with the faster court on Australian soil, this now tilts in favor of the other 3 women. Sabalenka Rybakina was last year's final. It was the best women's match I saw all year last year. It was absolutely unbelievable. And Sabalenka succeeding in the face of kind of a career, kind of marred by double faults was pretty amazing. Now, Sabalenka to me does not look to be in as good a form this year as she was last year heading into that tournament. That was like a shockingly lopsided result. And I had a feeling going in there, like talking to some of our other handicapping friends, like, man, how Rybakina plus 150 feels very generous. Like, this is a coin flip, right? And then you saw the first 3 games play out, and you're like, oh, it's not a coin flip at all. This is one-way traffic Rybakina. Like, holy smokes. And so that was a little bit eye-opening. And it's tempting to kind of take that particular result and put Rybakina as your second choice now over Sabalenka. Although Rybakina is not, they're going to have relatively similar draws. Sabalenka will be your Q2, your Q4 top seed as your overall number 2. Rybakina is your overall number 3. We don't know if she's going to be on the top or bottom. But what I will say is, because it's a 3-horse race, right? That means there's going to be an imbalance in the draw. We don't know if Rybakina is going to be on the top or the bottom.
Yep.
Right? And if she's on the top and she's got to play, and then Iga has to beat Rybakina and Sabalenka, that makes Iga longer odds. If Rybakina is on the bottom, then Iga only has to beat one of those 2. Then Iga is the clear choice to win. So the draw is going to really control a lot of my kind of final thoughts about who of these 3 women is the right value play at price. So basically, like in the moments after the draw, there's going to be a feeding frenzy of betting, just based on where Rybakina lands, top or bottom. Completely in the blind. My guess is Rybakina is going to be on the bottom, and that you're going to get an Iga Rybakina final. That's the most likely outcome here. It's worth kind of focusing, I guess, a little bit on what Iga's done, right? So Iga broke through at the French Open, right? She's a good clay player. Shouldn't shock anyone who follows tennis. Like, she's the best women's clay player in the world, and there's a margin, right? Any year she doesn't win the French Open is a bit of a surprise at this point. The conditions at the Australian Open are at the other polar end of the spectrum to Roland Garros in terms of speed, in terms of skill set it takes to succeed here. And it's worth kind of zeroing in on what Iga did after Wimbledon last year, where she definitely made a couple of clear changes to her style of play and her approach to be a more effective hardcourt player. It didn't result in a U.S. Open win. But she was, I thought, very, very effective at holding serve when she could get her first serve in. Her second serve was a massive liability still, but her hold break numbers shifted to where, you looked at Iga's like her statistical profile for the first 3 years she was a force, and she was capable of breaking on any given return game, and on any surface in any conditions in any weather. Like, it was amazingly impressive how effective she was in the return game, but she was using too much energy in the return game, and she was costing herself a little bit, I think, in the long run by kind of being so aggressive on return. And she's kind of become a more I think predictable and more longevity, more endurance in terms of kind of focusing on her serve and making that a bit stronger while being aggressive at the right times in return. And I think it's made her a more well-rounded player. I think it's made her a better player. And I think ultimately she's the bet for this tournament. I just want to know that she's only going to have to play one of Rybakina and Sabalenka. And I think if Coco Gauff is your other semifinalist and it's Iga versus Coco in the semifinals, that's not a very fair fight. On these conditions, Iga should be able to, absolutely play her off the court. And then, maybe you get a battle weary winner of Sabalenka Rybakina in the final, and then that's that. So that's kind of the shape of the women's draw. Iga clear number one choice, Rybakina number 2, Sabalenka 3, and then there's a gap. Coco Gauff 4th, and then there's a big gap, and then there's everyone else.
Yeah, that's the thing. A big disparity there. That's interesting because that draw on Thursday is going to be key then, because I think Rybakina beat Swiatek in the 4th round last year, which I, as I was writing my piece yesterday, I say it's disappointing for her, but it's not exactly a massive shock that can happen. And yeah, it's just got to be lucky with that draw and to at least make the semi-finals and see what goes from there.
Yep, I agree, and I would say Rybakina, for what it's worth, she always had Iga's number, right? Like, I don't know why, but like her style, her mentality, like she's not afraid of her. And that kind of makes her a little bit more dangerous challenger for Iga. But if it is coming on the heels of a really physical, long match in the semifinals against Sabalenka, then that does level things. It actually tilts them in favor of Iga, in my opinion.
So obviously here it's kind of we sort of said it's going to be out that big 3 at the top there. Just a few other players I wanted to mention that could, you never know, wipe out a top seed. Like I had a little look at, for instance, when Sofia Kenin beat Goff in the first round of Wimbledon last year and things like that. Obviously you've got Naomi Osaka, who's we're not really going to know too much about how she's going to come in, but just purely because of her pedigree, if she could pick off someone in the first couple of rounds, then that could shake things up. And someone that I wanted to mention was Aryna Svitolina, who Goff beat in that final in Auckland last week. And I feel like she might be able to knock out a few top seeds, because I think she knocked out someone. Let me have a look. Did she beat? Who did she beat last year? Someone quite in something significant, but made like the French Open last 8, Wimbledon last 4 last year. I think she did. So, as much as I personally myself, like you said, that top 3 is sort of set. One of them will probably be the winner. Will come from there. I do feel like there is some sort of value in sort of looking at that draw and where there might be some slip ups. Like Jessica Pegula for instance, is a player that's sort of been around that conversation of is she going to break through at some point and get to a final. But just interested to hear your thoughts on anyone that could really make that breakthrough.
Yeah, I think really that whole next tier, one of the reasons that there is as big a gap as I think there is that all of those players are likely to step on a banana peel. Pegula may be the least likely, I guess. She definitely has pedigree. She's not necessarily. I mean, she shouldn't be discounted. But I'd be a bit surprised if she could take out any of the top 4. And then the other ones absolutely are upset alert. Ons Jabeur, upset alert. Marketa Vondrousova is on upset alert. Maria Sakkari, upset alert. And then the whole next tier, Krejcikova, Beatrice Haddad Maia, Yelena Ostapenko, Samsonova. My goodness, Samsonova's form has completely eroded. Daria Kasatkina, Kudermetova, Caroline Garcia, potential early exits, as far as I can tell you from what I've seen recent form. Zheng Xinwen of China, who's your 12 seed, is a player that I always have ranked higher than the market, and I could see her making a final 8. You mentioned Elina Svitolina; she can absolutely make a final 8. And then the other 2 that'll round out the final 8, I honestly could be just total wild card surprises. You mentioned Osaka, who I would be genuinely surprised. There are some players with success at the slam level who are making returns, including Angie Kerber, Tomljanovic, and Osaka in this one, and Raducanu actually. And all 4, I would say, yeah, maybe they can be spoilers early in this tournament, knock out a seeded player, but it would be genuinely surprising if they were in the final 8. The withdrawn players, Mukova, Keys, Kvitova, and Bencic, those are all players who I would guess could succeed here, but will not be part of the action. So the door is wide open for some new final 8 players. If I'm going to make I'll have to stake my reputation on who's going to be in the final 8. Zheng Xinwen, Svitolina. I think Mira Andreeva. Mira Andreeva is kind of coming on right now, and she's had a little bit of an
that sort of mentioned last year. He said the traders are running scared of her, and because she's someone that's sort of surprised that she's that far up, but she also is obviously like a live threat, you could say, to some of those players.
Yeah, she fits the very specific mold of we don't know what her ceiling is. It could be number 1, like world number 1. It's very possible. And when you have a player who has you have a player on the women's side again, where you have best of 3, which is a little bit more chaotic, and you don't know exactly what their ceiling is, that open-ended distribution makes it very scary to price. I completely get it. And I think Andreeva, she has, because she's a young and experienced player, she's got ups and downs. She doesn't really have any wins that like make you kind of stand up and be like, wow, like she beat a player of that quality? How in the world? It's mostly that like the wins she's got are just dominant thumping of players who are kind of in the middle class, right? And that's so it's telling in some way that she does clearly have she does pretty clearly have a high floor, but we don't really know what the ceiling is. Can she beat an Iga? Can she beat a Goff? Can she beat a Sabalenka? It remains to be seen. Last year at the French Open, I believe, she ran into Goff in round 4. And the betting market flipped her from small dog to meaningful fave, and Goff took care of business. So it's kind of yet to be seen if Andreeva can do it at the at the highest level. But there's enough quality of her destroying women at the lower level that I think you have to kind of be you just have to be respectful that it could happen at any time. She was dominant in 3 rounds in Brisbane against lesser competition. Actually, I say lesser competition. She just completely embarrassed Ludmila Samsonova, who obviously has kind of won some pretty impressive tennis in her time. But then she lost to Linda Noskova in the quarterfinals, and Noskova is a good player. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think any of us hold kind of the ceiling for Noskova anywhere close to what we expect Andreeva to ultimately get to. I will kind of note she had a very close call in Beijing last October against Rybakina when Rybakina was playing quite well. She lost to Lila Fernandez in Hong Kong, which was a disappointment. But Andreeva is definitely someone to watch. She could make the final 8, and then I guess I'll round off my top 8 with we'll say Zhang gets there, Svitolina gets there. I'll put Pegula in the mix, and then we'll put Andreeva 8th.
There we have it. just before we then round off, then are we saying are we betting against the field rather than Swiatek, but betting with the field rather than Swiatek here, or is it Iga's to sort of win from your perspective?
So my literally finger hovering over the button, the yes no market, Rybakina on top, field. Rybakina on bottom, Iga. That's kind of the name of the game as you're watching the draw live, and it'll be early in the draw because that'll be the first. That'll be the first thing you know. Where is Rybakina? So, yeah, it's again, like, I want to be. I think ultimately, I do think Iga wins this title. She's made enough positive changes to her game over the last 4 months that I think she's going to be extremely tough to beat here unless she just runs into the wrong woman on the wrong day who's playing out of their minds, right? Like, it's going to take a special effort to defeat her in this tournament. And I know Rybakina has that level. I know Sabalenka has that level. I suspect there are very few other women that I think can match that level at this tournament. So, the yes no on Iga kind of comes down to, I want a little bit of no at price if she has to go through Rybakina and Sabalenka both, and I want yes if she's only got to play one of those two.
Perfect. Nice little round up to round off the podcast.